Mindbend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
Diego Ugalde, thanks for coming back to the Mindbend podcast.
Totally. Happy to be here, bro.
Happy to have you. Crazy time in Los Angeles. All of our prayers and thoughts go out to all the first responders and families displaced by these incredible, unimaginable fires that are happening right now. Still fortunate that we have a chance to get together. The studio is here and we can share a very specific message today about a new aspect of what you're doing. It's been around for a little bit, but let's talk about Warriorside. Last time you were on the show, we talked about Trident Approach, some of your background, and this is a different aspect of your engagement zone.
100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's funny when you were just talking about the fires, it's just a word that's hanging in my mind right now, which is what you said, which is unimaginable. Mm-hmm. So I'm just holding that space right now. There's just so many people dealing with things that I may never know, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, just holding space for them right now for sure.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with one of the frontline reporters who was talking to somebody who lived in the Pacific Palisades, and they were special forces. They're with the American Legion, helping with recovery efforts, and kind of said he'd been around to like 73 countries and seen all kinds of genocide and war-torn areas and bombed out villages and cities. And he said this was incomparable, really, the damage.
Yeah, and it's angering to some. You know, I think it was Jamie Lee Curtis that said something, made some sort of reference to Zaga or the really famous place right now in Israel and Palestine, the Gaza Strip.
Oh yeah.
And somebody got very angry, and it's not that it's just taking away. It's just that bad. It's just that torn. Mm-hmm. It's just that destroyed. Mm-hmm. It's just that all of those things. It doesn't mean that somebody's suffering worse or nobody's cause or anything like that is more or less important. It's just that bad.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. So, I don't know, maybe it just feels different just because I'm so close to it. I don't know, or that I've driven by there so many times, part of my life feels like. And anyway, I just felt like you're the first person I talked to about this. So I think that's why all this energy is like.
Yeah, man. I know it's most of us have kind of been hunkered down, staying in place, trying to stay out of the way. Mm-hmm. As time goes on, we will find ways to get involved and try to help contribute to restoration and rehabilitation, and continue to have like a positive impact on this part of our country and this part of the world that we're fortunate to be able to inhabit. But I wanted to have you back on today to discuss everything you're doing with Warriorside, and I'm going to be involved with that project with you. But it's an exciting concept, and on Mindbend, the show where we discuss non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness, oftentimes there's like a psychedelic component to it, but not always. We want to talk about things that help people explore, engage, and find a healthy relationship with their own consciousness. And it takes a certain amount of connectivity to be able to tell stories and to express yourself. And you can't do that if your mind is in disorder, right? You have to be able to get to a place where you can put your thoughts together, where you can have the confidence to get in front of a crowd. So in a nutshell, for the audience that has no concept of what we're going to be discussing here today, Warriorside is essentially a plan to be a storytelling academy for veterans who are looking at the potential to have a new aspect to their career life and to their personal life by learning how to tell stories and communicate in front of audiences in a new way through this particular kind of format. So why don't you share a little bit about the vision for Warriorside?
Yeah, so over the years that I've been involved in any kind of medicine, pre-hospital medicine, psychedelic medicine, whatever it is, there's always been this thing that's just kind of been hanging out there as a well-known element. The most powerful medicine that we have available to us is connection. It's always been there. And so even after finding psychedelics and you know how powerful that can be and, you know, just kind of life-changing and shifting, and still that it's still there, that, you know, Gabor Mate did this study where they put, you know, these electrodes on or these readers on people's heads and just sat with them during various mental health treatment scenarios, you know, EMDR, all these things, therapy, all the stuff. And they said that the most like actual physiological change that patients actually went through was when they were just sitting and talking with somebody who was just fully listening to them. It's like more important, more powerful than all of that. And so that also stood with me for a while. And it was, so we'll just say that it was kind of on the back burner for myself. And one day I had a keynote speech in Las Vegas at SciCon there. And I'm just like talking about all this huge stuff, this huge transformational, just life-changing, amazing stuff. And I'm looking out in the crowd and people are like on their cell phones. And I'm like, wow, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? Because there's no way that what I'm talking about is boring. It's just not possible. And I'm not connecting with them. So I'm like, man, what is this? Well, anyway, I went home, and it just so happened that a couple of weeks later, I had a keynote in Alaska to give. And so I started building that. I finished it, and I happened to get a call from a friend. And she's like, how's it going? And I'm like, well, it's going kind of great. But the one in Las Vegas preparation process was great too. And that didn't even land anywhere. And she's like, well, why don't you tell me this keynote thing. So I told it to her, and she said, it's an awesome story. Just switch up your order. Take the end, put it at the beginning, put the beginning at the end, switch out the two middle parts and see what happens. So I'm like, hey, I got nothing to lose. You know, we'll see what happens. So I went to Alaska, and I gave this keynote, and there were people crying. Everybody was laughing, and I got my first standing ovation walking off the stage. And I was like, who knew that all I had to do was switch up the order of this whole thing? So it just so happened that two people I coach flew out to Alaska to hear me talk, and sort of a thank you to them, I took them out to dinner. And I wanted to speak to one of them very specifically, because a few months before that, he sent me a text that said, dude, I'm being hunted. And it was a picture of a bear in the wild. And I was like, but he never responded. Like, I didn't know what happened, you know what I mean? So I'm like, dude, what happened? Did you live? Like, what happened? and he just went into telling the story. He's like, I got on the seaplane. They dropped me off in the middle of Alaska, and for a 5-day bear hunting trip. On the first day, I picked up the trail of a bear. And on the second day, I realized that the bear was hunting me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on here? And he's like, you know, I looked out over the horizon, and I saw this head just kind of very, very slowly just appearing over the horizon, looking to the left, looking to the right, and then very, very, very slowly sinking. And then 45 minutes later, 300 yards from that point, the bear was doing the same thing. And he was like, this guy's coming after me. And so he didn't know, like, every time there was a twig that broke, he didn't know if a claw was going to come out of nowhere and just lop his head off. He didn't know how to sleep. He didn't know when to sleep. And so finally, he just pulled out his map, and he's like, well, this thing is using wind direction. It's using defilade. It's using terrain against me to come get me. So if I stay right here, you know, he's going to be funneled through this way, and I'm going to eventually end up getting him. And that's exactly what happened. He ended up shooting the bear, but it was like this huge just release, because he was being hunted by this monster to himself. But the whole time he's talking, I'm thinking, man, people need to hear these stories. Because whenever is there an opportunity to just sit there and listen, because these aren't the only stories. I mean, every veteran I've ever met has 20 unbelievable stories that would just seem not impossible to anyone else just listening to them. And so as he was talking, even the word Warriorside came to me. And so when we were done with that, I came back home, and we just got to work, and I was gifted by Kristen Osborne an amazing space inside the Hotel del Coronado to put on our first show, and we did. And it was super, super powerful. And so one of the amazing things that came out of it was The whole idea that we were doing it with connection in mind, storytelling and connection. And the connection, the amount of connection that actually transpired there at the Hotel Del during our first kind of soft opening was super powerful. And I was like, oh man, like this is the deal. Let's keep doing this. This is awesome.
So that was, let's get people together to tell stories on a night that we will create a ticketed event and make it an event.
Yes.
And you had that event in mind as this sort of prototype model for a future plan of series like that.
Yes.
And did you engage with the speakers who participated in that event with any kind of speaker training or education beforehand?
It was, we had like weekly meetings. One person a week would share their story, and we would, just give our insights of what we thought, how we thought we could make the story more powerful and better. And then, of course, ever since that keynote, I went back and started to read people like Matthew Dix and just amazing storytellers, their tactics on how they go about teaching storytelling training. And so then, we absolutely implemented those things into the feedback. It was kind of, everybody has their own jobs and their own things to do. I had coaching going on and all this stuff, so it wasn't a focus. But we did get some, you can see that there was a transformation in the stories due to the feedback and the notes and things that we were taking. And for sure, after the night of performance, it was clear, just one thing, the only thing we need to do to make this better is to actually get serious training going on. And so that's really where the whole thing, I think, came, at least to this point, full circle of, it's not just telling stories, it's how do we get these people to tell the most amazing stories imaginable with their lived experience. And that's really where this came from.
The first event was 4 individuals.
Yes.
And everyone who participates in Warriorside has to have a service background, correct?
So the nonprofit side of it is for veterans. And I've had all kinds of people come out of the woodwork being like, I want to go through this training program who are not veterans. They also want to learn these storytelling training tactics. Wow. And so we're gonna provide a space for that for sure. But initially what we are going to be doing is focusing on these veterans so that, number one, it's just kind of where my heart is nearest and dearest, having spent 20 years in the military. But, one of the other things that kind of came out of it is, in addition to the storytelling training, in addition to the connection, is there so many people that can benefit professionally from storytelling. And not only keynote speakers, although that's a huge thing, but sales, attorneys, opening staff, all these things, where the ability to tell a story can have a direct result on how successful you are or not. So all of these things are coming to mind. All of these things are part of our curriculum now. So we're super excited about it.
So what does it take to get a thing like Warriorside going? It's a nonprofit 501c3. And how are you shaping the vision, like practically? You have an event coming up in March.
Yeah, March 29th is going to be our grand premiere in the House of Blues in San Diego. And so how essentially the event is going to work is we're going to open up our first cohort for veterans to apply for their training program. They have to have some buy-in. They're going to have an entrance fee, and then it's going to be 2 weeks of storytelling training. Everything from, I think the thing that's going to be different about us is we're going to incorporate consciousness into telling stories. So this is not going to be an ego-driven thing, or if it is, just at least ego awareness. Like for example, before psychedelics, I didn't even know I had an ego. So we're going to have discussions in the classroom so people can get to know these different parts of themselves, so they know who's speaking when they're on stage. So it's just more self-awareness, more being present. I can't tell you how many times I've been on stage and I go on and I go off and I don't know what I said, and everybody said whatever they said, but I had no idea because I kind of wasn't there.
Is that being distracted?
No, it's just being in fight or flight mode and just going into muscle memory, which is not the optimal state to be in whenever you have the opportunity. If I notice that I'm in a state of muscle memory, just having everything, I'm not really living, you know what I mean? And which is interesting because I talk about that a little bit about we talked about this, I think, in the book. last time I was here about the whole idea of muscle memory doing like house runs, in close quarters combat when we're looking for bad guys. You can very, very easily, in fact, even some of the objectives in the SEAL teams is to get really good at muscle memory. So when the stress goes in, you just happen to be doing the right thing. And what I have found is that is a gift and a crutch and something that I don't necessarily have to use when I don't need it anymore. So noticing if I have the capacity to recognize that I'm in a state of muscle memory and then being, oh, where am I? How am I? What is now? And so, for example, we're going to be talking about that in class. So when these people are up on stage or they are in a podcast or whatever it is, in fact, I just did it just now. Just now I realized that like, oh, there's like this kind of storm of words coming out of my mouth and I'm just, hold on.
Operating.
I am here. I'm here now. I'm here with Matt. We're both safe. Everything is amazing. Matt's awesome. Okay, let's start. What are we doing? And so to be able to have that ability to do that on stage in front of 500 people where you can really, because it's not just about making sound. It's not just about offloading energy, the energy of the words. It is, there is something that I experienced that if I do this amazingly well, I can give you a window into the experience that I had for myself. Not that so you'll know, not so that you'll understand, so that you can connect with me. Because this is how I really fucked up, and so it's not about, not a lot of this is going to be about how awesome I am. A lot of this stuff is going to be, here are the hardcore lessons that I learned because I just didn't know any better.
Well, and I think what you're talking about mechanically is the difference between somebody who is very adept at creating a space where the information is accessible and the connection is more poignant, and therefore the takeaway from the audience is going to be more immediate, right? More felt. And I think that would be a good educational component to somebody who has a career in sales or a career in law or public speaking or anything where they're having to communicate effectively. When you're talking about this too, I'm thinking about music also. Like I'm always more interested in the performance of someone who is recognizing that the audience is a part of what's going on. Somebody who's just up there kind of going through the motions and kind of like operating is different than somebody who recognizes that there's a symbiotic relationship in that moment and that the audience is going to be affected if that performer or that speaker is capable of creating that symbiotic component, which is so important for public events, public speaking, storytelling.
So everything is connected all the time. It's just more of a matter of being in that state of awareness. So even, for example, there's being present. I'm here now. I am speaking. ING words help a lot for me to bring myself back to what is happening. And then there is being presence, which is connection and observance of all that is. And you can imagine, you've probably seen some of these pictures of these human bodies where there's just light irradiating from all around them. And we're all doing that. Even these plastic trees are, the grass, the rocks, and all that stuff is all there. So imagine telling your story from this place of deep connection. What kind of connection you can have with somebody who is experiencing that within you, instead of somebody who's talking at you, somebody who's going through muscle memory, somebody who's just... and there's nothing wrong. We're all just working on this stuff. Nobody's doing anything wrong. But I think that there are higher states of being as you're kind of working through all this stuff. And that's absolutely one of the things that we're going to allow them to work towards if they want to. They don't have to. You don't have to care about ego. You don't have to care about anything. We're going to put on the course of instruction as it is. And if people really, really want to get in deeper connection with themselves in that way, it'll be available to them. And for those who don't, we'll just be planting seeds, and it's up to them whether or not they want to cultivate those seeds.
Yeah, but
or
it
not.
sounds like it is an integral component of what you're offering and what will differentiate, what you're doing with Warriorside from other forms of public speaking training or confidence training or elocution in general. Like, I mean, the mindfulness and the awareness sounds like it's something that you've learned on your own, and so then would want to teach others. What else does the teaching entity look like? Who's it comprised of? Who's involved in Warriorside, and what does this training actually kind of look like? I know you said there's like a 2-week program that people go through in advance of the actual event, but can you get into the details a little bit more about what goes on in the training?
Yeah, so the first week of training or the first course of instruction is some of the stuff that we just talked about can take years to understand.
Sure.
There's no going around that. That's just the way it is. But and I'll be heading some of that stuff up, and then we've teamed up with somebody who used to be a storytelling training person with the Moth, and he's a veteran, and so he's been teaching people how to tell stories for the last 7 years. And also a veteran, so he's got that connective component going on. And so essentially, the second day of training is really going to be about, what in military terms, there's something that's called 7 points of performance as it relates to shooting. You get your stance right, you get your breathing right, you get your grip right, your trigger squeeze and sight alignment and that kind of thing. These are 7 points of performance that we learn in order to hit the target every time as fast and consistently as possible. Well, we've developed the 7 points of performance for public speaking, and step one is life, because stories are happening every day in life. It's just, are you looking at your life with the storyteller's eyes? And what does that look like? And so, because, you pay attention to your life and you write down all the stories that you experience over the course of a year, you can have 30 to 365 stories that you never would have had if you weren't necessarily paying attention. So, that's where it starts. And then it ends with, the same 7th point as it is with shooting, which is second sight picture. You make sure that, a lot of times when people are shooting weapons, they pull the trigger and they just move on to the next thing, which what happens there is a split second before they actually pull the trigger, they move the gun off of the target without realizing it. So they're not really following through.
Catching the ball before you've caught the ball.
Yeah. Just looking down the field before you catch the ball. Yeah. Exactly right. And so with our point, it's our second sight picture, going back over your speaker reels, going back over the lessons learned, going back over some of the footage that you took, the audience reaction, your voice inflections, all of those things, going back to the drawing board. And that's the last step of public speaking for us, is basically just following on to the next one. So that's the first day of class after the consciousness training. And then the next one is stage presence. And so just looking at things about slowing down the heart rate, just dumping all the energy possible, that gets jammed up within you. So where kind of stage fright comes from, learning about making eye contact, but maybe in a different way that they've heard before, understanding this whole idea about being present. So, filler words and all those things start to get a little more minimized for themselves. And then we do spend a lot of time breaking out when they're not expecting, and they're going to have to get up in front of the class and start telling stories. There's so much more than just storytelling academics. There are people in the drop of a hat are going to have to get up to the front of the class and just start telling stories, and just for the fact of iteration. So, I've been talking about shooting a lot. I used to teach marksmanship all the time. And what I found when I very first started teaching was I would teach everyone everything I knew about shooting. And then by the time the end of the course was, they only shot like maybe a couple of 100 rounds down range. And I was like, I'm talking more than they're shooting. This is not helping. So we're making sure that they're having an opportunity to speak publicly, unprepared, in very strange circumstances as much as possible, so that when it's time for them to go up on stage, they've got several iterations underneath their belt, when it's time to perform.
Do you feel like you've gotten more adept over time? I think I know what the answer to this question is, but Do you feel like you've gotten more adept over time at helping people through process?
Absolutely. In the beginning, I started that process of helping people with the lens of I knew better, 100%. And now learning all the many ways that I've learned that I don't know better. So it's just helping them through their process for whatever it is for them. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because we want to be able to apply what we've learned in a way that actually moves the needle for whatever we engage with at any time. And that also helps us be excited about projects that we're undertaking, to think that we can actually make something happen by endeavoring to actualize this vision. Is it safe to say, because I've been telling people about what you're doing, is it safe to say that you're aspiring to create essentially something like the Moth for the veteran community?
Yeah, before this, I had never heard of the Moth. And somebody was like, oh man, what you're talking about, it's just like the Moth. I was like, what's the Moth? And so the answer is I'm not entirely sure, because, so I've been to an open mic for the Moth. There are some differences. For example, in order to get on stage for the Moth, you don't need any training. Anyone in the world can go to an open mic event that the Moth is putting on, and they have locations and events going on globally. Anybody can get on stage, and it's amazing to watch some of these people. Especially, there are some people very, very clearly they're up there just because getting on stage is something they're absolutely petrified of doing. And you see them standing in front of the microphone, literally trembling, trying to get the words out. And it's very beautiful. And it's very powerful to see somebody just, I'm doing it anyway. I don't care. I am going to do this. It's amazing. The Moth does offer training, but it's not a prerequisite to get on stage. With Warriorside, we have the intention to kind of make this elite level storytelling training. And so what that means, though, is so when people are in class, the focus is on helping them in their way become better speakers for themselves. The shows, however, that we're putting on, the focus there is to showcase the best speakers that we have. So we have 30 people in a cohort. There's only going to be 7 of those people who are going to make the big stage, or, for example, they're going to be performing at the House of Blues with us. It doesn't mean that the other people can never get on stage. It took me 10 years to be a SEAL. I broke bones, I did all this stuff. Just keep going, just keep trying, keep working at it. And so when you graduate, the cohort, you'll have the certificate in what we call FEST, which is essentially the foundations of elite storytelling training tactics. When they graduate from that, the highest performers actually get an opportunity to go on stage, and they'll be given sort of the rank, so to speak, of Warriorside storyteller. And then after that, we have further courses that go into PowerPoints and breakout rooms and all these things, so that they can go on to tell or to have keynotes with major corporations. I mean, I've been paid $25,000 to do a keynote before. There's no reason why these people can't also do that. And so when they go through that kind of corporate-based training, where these keynotes are not, these stories are not 10 minutes long, they're 90 minutes long, they're multi-day types of things, then they have the opportunity to become a Warriorside story or Warriorside speaker. And in the Warriorside speaker, we're going to have our own speakers bureau. And eventually what we're looking for is when somebody says, hey, we want to get a veteran to speak, they're going to just know to go to Warriorside, and we're going to have vetted speakers who've been trained, who've been through all the stuff. They've got, their speaker reels are on there, all the things ready for them to go. And so they know that this is a trusted source. So that's eventually where we're going with this.
Who are veterans sought by for speaking engagements? Who's in the market to bring in somebody with military experience specifically, and why?
Yeah, most of it has something to do with leadership. Like, for example, You know, when somebody was in college going through leadership classes or even getting their PhD in leadership, I was scrubbing toilets, and I was in charge of 2 people scrubbing toilets kind of thing. And so my 20 years in the military, I have 20 years of actual serious leadership, where somebody who has been in the corporate world for 20 years, like, who knows where it's nobody's fault, nobody's doing anything wrong, but it's just not comparable. You can't compare somebody's leadership experience who's been in the military for 5 years by somebody who hasn't been. So leadership absolutely seems to be one of the core elements of why somebody seeks military perspective. And the real trick is for the veterans to understand what are the connective points, what's the connective tissue between what I know as a leadership and how this could possibly apply to Google. You know, that is a trick. That's not something that is necessarily readily coming off the lips of any military leader. So understanding what it is that their experience is, what it is that they think that they know, and how that can actually apply to people who don't have to worry about shooting guns, that don't have to worry about tactics or anything like that. How does this apply to corporate leadership? Those are going to be the ones who are really, really the most powerful connectors, I think, with folks. And the last thing that I'll say is it seems to me that people are coming more and more to the awareness of maybe this like extreme, you know, win at all costs, all this stuff kind of narrative that's been going on for a very, very, very long time, 20 years in our country in terms of talking heads. I think people are starting to understand that that's not necessarily the case all the time. It's not necessarily the optimal case all the time. Not everyone is meant to be an extreme anything. Not everybody is meant to dominate the competition. And it doesn't mean that they suck. I mean, they have huge, amazing potential and power that may just look different. So how can I find somebody who can speak that language to them, whether they're, you know, a type A or 100% not type A? It's not that they don't matter. They totally matter. It's like, what are the gifts that they're bringing to the table, and how can we help leverage that?
Are the most powerful stories, to generalize, are the most powerful stories the most traumatic stories that veterans have to share?
Not necessarily. We had, during our soft opening, a guy get on stage and his family happened to be in the audience. And he said, a lot of times my family has this idea of me about how I think or how I am and what I'm doing. But there's something about me they don't know. There's something about my experience in life that I've never told them. And I can't imagine a better place to tell them than now. And he did such a beautiful job in sort of explaining it that it was really kind of funny, because he had 2 sons in the audience. They were in their 20s, and they both simultaneously scooched up to the front of their seats and said, "Oh man, we can't wait to hear this." And everybody in the audience just laughed. And he told them, "It's not that I don't love you." And it was like, whoa, okay, you know. It's not that I don't care about you. It's that I have never loved myself. And I didn't know how. I love you guys. I never knew how to show it. And there was so much more to the story, of course. And it was so powerful and so amazing. And that's what I loved about the whole idea of Warriorside, is because it just provided the container for that conversation that has just been hanging there in that family for 20 years to happen. We had this amazing engagement. This is with the Trident Approach, and we were working with a hockey team in Georgia. And it was the night of the championship. It was a game they've been playing all year. And the coaches just wanted us to talk with them, have them go out on a walk. They didn't want us to work them out or anything. And so we took them out to the marsh, just we were in the middle of Savannah, Georgia. And we get in the buses, we get off the buses, and me and the other Trident Approach Pathfinder were the first ones off the bus. And we're waiting. These guys were just lollygagging, kind of taking their time to get off the bus. You would never know that the championship game was going to be played in like 4 hours. And we had a really good relationship with them. We didn't know what was going on. And so I asked the question, like, who doesn't want to be here? And it wasn't like this military, who doesn't want to be here because I can get you out of here right now. It was a real question. Like, who would literally rather be somewhere else? And one guy rose his hand, and he was looking down at the ground, and he continued to have his hand raised, and he walked next to me, and then he turned around and faced his team, but he was still looking down at the ground, still with his hand raised, and he said, my cousin was murdered 2 days ago. And no one knew it. Nothing. I looked around the faces, everybody was shocked. The coaches were shocked, his best friends on the team were shocked, everybody was shocked. And so we worked through that. I was like, well, man, raise your hand if you thought that he was here to play this game here. And everybody did. So it's just like, we're human. We're having these human experiences. We have the opportunity to show up for each other and all these things. We had that conversation. They ended up playing the game. They won the game. And at the end of the game, he comes to me. He's like, I wanted to thank you so much for giving me the courage to say that. And I was like, I didn't give you the courage. I just gave you the time and space. That's it. The courage is within you. And so that's really what I think a lot about with Warriorside is we're just giving the time and space to have these conversations that may have never been had before. And they don't necessarily need to be connected to trauma or explosions or loss. It can just be of the human condition, and that's all that's needed.
Who do you want to come to the event at House of Blues in March, and why should they want to be there?
So the idea, the belief in what we're doing is connection. And that's not connection with certain type of people. It's to connect with community. It's not only veterans connecting with themselves by learning more and more and going deeper and deeper into the story, which is their own. The way we have about deconstructing a story or reconstructing it allows them to examine parts of themselves that they may have not necessarily had an opportunity to examine before. So it's connecting with the self, which is powerful. But it's also to connect with community, because a lot of these, everyone hears the number, 22 veterans kill themselves every day. Some people say it's up in the 30s and 40s. We don't know, but, they're not doing it surrounded by loved ones. They're doing it alone in a basement, in a car, or whatever it is. They're doing it from a place of disconnection. So we're trying to inspire connection through these stories. And it's not only veterans that are disconnected at all. We're so disconnected, as far as I can tell, in our culture with cell phones and remember back in the day when somebody rang the doorbell at your house, like everybody freaked out, like, somebody's here, like, let's go check it out, like, who's coming to visit us? And now it's like somebody rings the door, it's like, who's here? Hey, are you expecting somebody? Like, who could that be? So what we're trying to do with this is inspire reconnection through the power of storytelling. And so it's not just about hearing the stories, but it's to incite the audience to be like, what story haven't I told my family? And instead of, sitting around the TV with everybody on their cell phones, there's another option, which is to sit around a fire and say, something I've never told you guys, and see what happens. And it has nothing to do with people being right or wrong or anything. This is just my perspective on things. And that's all it is. Having those conversations can open the door. So who do I want there? I want everybody there. I want everybody showing up. I want people to know that this country is not as divided as we think. If we just learn to hold space and listen to somebody and love them regardless of how they think. Because I know for example, when I think about like my stance, my stance, that's just funny for me to say that out loud. My stance on anything, but my stance, for example, on immigration, when I was 19 years old, is ridiculously different than what it is today. And it doesn't even matter. So it doesn't matter with somebody or even myself summed myself up with how I thought about something on a particular day of my life is ludicrous. It's just where I was at the time. I can learn. And how do I learn? Listen. That's it. And so can you listen to someone and hold space with somebody without judgment at all? Just listen to them. Just love them and hold them while they're talking about this thing, which is always vulnerable, which is always kind of giant, and just leaving it at that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Can you just listen? And I think if we learned how to do that, we wouldn't be divided about anything, because everybody thinks differently. There is no normal, like at all. So, but we think that there is, or we talk about that there is. And I think that's why it could be a component of why we're so divided. It's like, oh, you're not the way I think you're supposed to be. That doesn't even exist. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's crazy. Just be.
Once Warriorside has been around and is deeply established and flourishing, you'll have to start the division of Warriorside that's for listeners. Because I'm sure that's part of the training with the speakers, but as you know firsthand, you could have the most incredible show in the world and people are still going to have to resist the temptation to be fiddling with their cell phones or finding themselves slipping out of whatever it takes to be open enough to allow connection to occur.
Yeah, and so I can want all the things that I want, and it's kind of irrelevant. There were a couple of times you were asking me like how I want this, and which is totally valid and great question to have. And at the same time, I don't have any wants in that way, because everybody's in their own. So let's say they do slip into their cell phone. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just where they are at the moment. Just like we're talking about, these storytellers being on stage. I mean, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm totally in muscle memory right now. Let me just bring myself back. And that's how it starts. So, and that is part of our listening course of it all as well. If I'm sitting and somebody's doing the Charlie Brown teacher thing, it's like, oh, wait a minute, let me bring back and let me listen to every word they say. Let me just listen, no judgment, just listening. And yeah, absolutely. And that's a part of our job we also have an MC, the one who's like kind of setting the expectations, the groundwork for the beginning of the show and introducing each one of the speakers coming up on stage. That's something that they talk about, is holding space like that, listening that deeply, just like that. And you're not doing anything wrong if you can't. You don't suck if you can't. You're not good enough if you can't. But just introducing the idea. And no matter what this person comes up on stage 2 minutes after I'm up here, can you just hear them, no matter what they're saying? And just accept them, no matter what they say. Because we're not crafting these stories. These stories are a direct reflection from their visceral lived experiences. I can't tell them what to say. I can't tell them what to do. I can't tell them how to edit their story to make it, is real. And that's all it is. And so I can't adjust the words that come out of their mouth so that it just looks better. That's not what it is. It's how do I bring the full, powerful truth, if there is such a thing, or perspective of this situation to light so that you can see what I saw. And that's it.
Would you share with us, as we conclude here, the details for the event and where people can go to learn more about everything you're doing and what you've got planned?
Yeah, so the details are March 29th, 2025, at the House of Blues in San Diego. Showtime's at 7 o'clock. You can get tickets at universe.com, Warriorside in San Diego, if you search for that. And then you could also get tickets. The link is also on our website, warriorsidefoundation.org. And we have all our mission there. If you are inspired to donate, it costs about $40,000 to put on an entire cohort from beginning to commencing a show. So we're definitely going to be depending on sponsors and donors and that to help us get these veterans through. We want to have, a cohort a month if possible, and we're going to be doing this all around the country. The storytelling training is super, super real, so we don't do it on video. All of this, people are standing in front of an audience as they're talking, in front of their classmates and that type of thing. So we're going to be going all around the country to do this. So we also have landing pages for people who wish to donate or sponsor our shows on our website, warriorsidefoundation.org. And they'll be able to do that quite easily over there. And we would greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate this gift. And like I said, I mean, it's just, it's one thing to have like these fire circles, but it's a whole other thing to when these veterans leave, they have a career path. If they want to be public speakers, if they want to get better at their sales job, if they want to get better at communicating with their family. I mean, this is something that they're not gonna know how to tell this particular story really well. They're going to know how to tell a good story, which is a completely different thing. And so that's something that we're really super excited about.
Dude, I'm excited for you, excited to watch Warriorside grow and be a part. Thanks for coming on to share with our audience about everything you've got going on, and we will check back in the future, hopefully after the event, and see what's going on next. We'll share details on the website and everything too, and people can get in touch with you through your website, social media, to learn more and to potentially become involved themselves.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.